Welcome to Job 31 as we look at the final words of Job. This little section of Job. These are rough and ready videos. I don't rehearse them, and hopefully they'll help in some way in helping us to get into the detail of Job. On Sundays we are looking at things in a bit more bigger picture. So actually, a sermon this Sunday will be on Job 29 to 31. But this is just doing a bit more detail to help us benefit from reading through Job together as a church. So having said in chapter 30 just how much he's been suffering, now Job's bringing things to a climax. In a sense, the question why hangs over this chapter, and it's a final appeal, and he's going to leave that question like as a challenge, just hanging to God. So let's dive in and see how Job makes his case. Verses 1 to 3, he's talking about his he's got a clear conscience as he's in a covenant relationship, in a committed relationship of promise and of ultimately of faith in God. I've made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin in lust? Don't think Job's necessarily signalling that this is just a big problem. He has many men have a big problem with pornography or lust in different ways, and sexual sin. It's a powerful dynamic in our lives, isn't it? But I think it's kind of a representative of desire. It's Job saying, "Look, I'm not playing a game here, and I've got a clear conscience. Look, I've said I'm not going to look lustfully on a woman, and I haven't. If I had, God would be right to treat me as his enemy, but I haven't." But that's the puzzle, verse 3, is not calamity for the unrighteous and disaster for the workers of iniquity. That's been the whole thing of the book, hasn't it? This worldview where if you do good, you get good, and if you do bad, you get bad here and now. And Job's sort of presenting that. Look, his comforters have said, yes, exactly, Job, therefore you must have sinned. But Job is saying, look, I haven't even looked at a woman lustfully, yet God is treating me like the unrighteous. Why? Verse 4 to verse 6, again talking about how his relationship with God is not one that's just outward, but it's in his heart. It's in his core of who he is, in his gut, if you like. Does he not see my ways and number my steps? If I'd walked with falsehood and my foot had hastened to deceit, let me be weighed in a just balance and let God know my integrity. So he's really just saying, look, I've got nothing to hide here. From who I am, I'm committed to walking with the Lord. And then from verse 7 down, there are all these ifs. If I did this, then God, you'd be, fair enough. I deserve your judgment if I'd sinned in these ways and not repented of my sin. And so we go through verse 7 and 8. It's turning aside in my heart. If I turned aside from you in my heart. Verse 11 to 12. If I'd committed adultery. Verse 13 to 15. If I'd mistreated my servants and those dependent on me or those I had power over. In some ways, it's a very useful chapter, isn't it? It's sort of exposing sin. What are the things that God cares about? So this is a diagnostic chapter, isn't it, that we can use? That's not the point of the chapter, but it comes up, doesn't it? These are relevant things in our day, aren't they? A lack of generosity to the needy, verse 16 to 18. Well, actually, maybe more even to 19 and 20. 21 seems to be moving to violence against the defenceless. Again, just today, it's in a day and age where we think it's nothing to kill 200,000 babies in the womb every year. This is an instructive chapter to us, isn't it, in terms of our sins as people, as a nation. Verse 24, relevant is again, if I trusted in wealth. Call fine gold my confidence. And linked to that, because greed is very linked in the Bible to idolatry, verse 26, it's idolatry. If I'd looked at the sun when it shone, or the moon moving in splendour, my heart had been secretly enticed, and my mouth has kissed my hand. If I'd served other gods than you, God, if I'd put in my heart other things above you, all these things are if that, then Lord, I can understand why you'd be treating me this way. But I haven't done that. Is the underpinning of all of this? Being vindictive to enemies. So for Job, it's loving his enemies is part of trusting the Lord. Verse 29, verse 30, 31. If I'd lacked hospitality to strangers, how I treated refugees and asylum seekers and people who I don't know very well. And he ends with verse 33, hypocrisy. If I had concealed my transgressions as others do by hiding my iniquity in my heart. So he's saying, look, if I was a hypocrite, then this would be the case. His great claim is that he isn't a hypocrite. I think some of us sometimes find Job difficult because we kind of can't really imagine how he can say all these things, and we'll maybe just come to that in a bit. But his claim is that, yes, he's a sincere guy with integrity. And if we didn't have chapter 1 and 2 and chapter 42, we might not believe, but God says, look at Job, my servant. There's none like him with integrity of heart. He's a true believer. He's a genuine guy. So we know that Job is speaking the truth here. But he ends in he doesn't end in verse 35, but the climax in a sense is verse 35 to 37. 38 to 40, he calls his land to bear witness to him. So like he began saying, look, I've got a clear conscience. I haven't even looked lustfully on a woman. At the end, he's saying, look at my land. My land bears testimony to the fact that I've lived as a righteous man. But the focus is, verse 35, oh, that I had one to hear me. It's like a law court situation. He's looking for a judge, someone he can lay his case before. Here's my signature. Okay, here's the accusation sheet. Here's the legal calling into court. Let the Almighty answer me. Oh, that I had the indictment written by my adversary. Give me a charge sheet. What have I done, Lord? I want to sort this out. If I'm guilty and in the wrong and not your friend, I need to know, and you can judge me. You can treat me as guilty. You can punish me. This will be over. But if I am your friend and if I'm innocent, then vindicate me, justify me, show that to the world, to myself. Explain why I've been going through all of this that's gone on. He's calling God into court, and it's not something that now that God can not answer. Silence will be read as being kind of guilt. So it's a very big moment in the book. Job is laying down the gauntlet to God. We'll see how Elihu reacts to that next chapter, because that makes him angry as he sees that Job has overstepped the mark. But that's what's going on here in this chapter. So how do we make sense of this? What do we learn from this? Well, Job is a real believer, but so this chapter points us to one who wasn't just a real believer, but was purely righteous. So we thought in chapter 30 of how Job's sufferings point us to Christ. Well, here, as Job defends himself, he defends himself as one who is a sinner, a repentant sinner. But Jesus truly goes through the charge list of every aspect of his life, and he hasn't committed a single sin. He's the pure and spotless Lamb, and he had to be in order to be a rescuer, to be a sufficient and perfect sacrifice for us, to rescue us. So this chapter should, again, give us that view of Jesus and make us marvel at him where we fall so short. He doesn't, but he doesn't do that to stand over us and say, look, I could do it, why can't you? He does it so that he can be gracious to us and give us his righteousness as he takes from us all of our sin in the wonderful way that God saves. But also Job, I guess, points us to the wonderful truth of the gospel, that we are given that righteousness from God to us. Job maybe wouldn't have had those words and understood that reality that Romans 4 talks about. Romans 4, the blessing of the one to whom God counts righteousness apart from works. Job might not have known about righteousness apart from works, but that's what he believed. He wasn't saying I'm a sinless person. He was saying I'm a righteous person because I've made sacrifices for my sins. I've repented. I've trusted you, God, and done it with a sincere heart, and I've turned away from sin and in a proper way. So Job was someone who was walking in the light, I guess, in 1 John terms. So he wasn't concealing his sin. He was being honest and trusting that God was faithful and just to forgive him his sins. And that's what it is to be a real Christian. So Job's an example to us here. But we're going to see that while in some ways this is the end of Job's words, he's still going to say a few things, but basically this is the end for Job. There's lots that we can see that's positive. Elihu's going to pick him up, and then God is going to speak to him, because there's some humbling for Job. So as much as Job has got some things that he's right about, he isn't completely right. There's much he doesn't understand, and there's some things in his attitude towards God which need correcting and repenting of. So we're going to see that as we go to Elihu and then to God's response to Job.